Welcome to Hanif Bismi show. Hope you all are doing well. Please continue to follow the health protocols and advices. Today, we have a very special guest on Hanif Bismi show, who has been the voice of voiceless, not only in Australia, in our parliament, but for the oppressed people around the world. Hanif Bismi show welcomes Honorable Mr. David Shoebridge,
Thanks very much, Hanif. Lovely to be here.
Member of Legislative Council, representing the Greens in New South Wales Parliament. He's been in the Parliament since September 2010.
Yes.
And David has a bachelor degree in arts and laws from Sydney University and been a solicitor for some time.
Solicitor and barrister.
And barrister,
Yes.
yeah.
I think of myself as a recovering barrister.
And very active in Australian socio-political realm.
Yep.
And once again, welcome and thank you for coming to 5 News Australia studio. It's a pleasure meeting with you. And I remember in your first speech in the Parliament, 2010, the first speech, few pages, I gone through some of them. And the last sentence which attracted me very well. It says, my highest aim in my time here, means the Parliament, is to earn the right to that trust. So everything related on trust. And I've been observing you for some times. I've been attending your conference and meetings. Even last few weeks ago we met. And in my observation, David, you have gained that trust during your term in the Parliament.
Thank you, Hanif.
And I wish and hope that you'll maintain that trust. And you build that trust between the community and Parliament and with people. Once again, thank you. And now we come to the question.
Indeed. But just before we go on to that, I do think one of the jobs of a Greens MP, what we bring to Parliament, is hopefully trying to have those links between the community and hopefully an active and engaged community and Parliament. And I always think of my job largely not being inside Parliament. Yes, I have to do the job there and work there, but the job is doing what we're doing today, out there speaking with community, making those links and hopefully bringing the community into Parliament. That's I hope to do that as best I can. I'm sure we could always do better, but that's the basic plan.
Yeah, reaching out to the community, that's very important.
Yeah. And bringing community voices onto the floor of Parliament, into the work we do.
That's what I noticed.
Yes.
And because the climate change, we'll start with the climate change, because I know you're very vocal about it. And we all affecting last 2019, we had a very bad bushfire. And I note that, and I watched that you were arrested during one of the climate protests in 2019. Could you please elaborate where we as a nation stand on climate change today?
Well, we are failing as a nation, future generations on climate. We are so fortunate in Australia. We have one of the richest countries on the planet, huge resources available to us, the very best assets for wind power and solar power. But we're also the biggest polluters on the planet. We, per capita, produce the most carbon dioxide and have the greatest impact per capita on climate of any people on the planet. You go to Newcastle, and Newcastle, just up to the north of Sydney, is the world's biggest export coal facility. You're putting out hundreds of millions of tons of coal to the rest of the world every year. So we have a particular obligation to step up and take the lead on climate, to transition out of the coal industry, to radically reduce our emissions and to show some leadership, because we're wealthy enough to do it. And we also have an amazing opportunity. We have the ability to produce endless amounts of solar power, endless amounts of wind power, and become basically a renewable superpower. But instead, we have politicians who are literally owned and bought by industries from the 20th century, the coal industry, the gas industry, and we're just not making that transition. Many of your viewers may have remembered when only in the last month we saw Australian politician, the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, go to the Glasgow conference, the COP26 Glasgow conference.
I read in the news, yeah.
And the stall that the Australian government had on the floor of the conference was sponsored by a gas company. It was sponsored by Santos. It was an incredibly poor decision. And it shows how much work we have to do on climate. So
hopefully people like you will have a more impact on the government to follow the...
Well, that's the plan. When I was arrested, actually, in December of 2019, I was arrested because I was with hundreds of school students. And these were kids who were 13, 14, 15, 16 years old. And they were protesting for climate change out the front of the Prime Minister's house, official house on the north side in Kirribilli. And
I watched it.
Yeah, and there were the fires. It was a catastrophic time. The skies in Sydney were yellow. Ash was falling. And I was there with them to just show some solidarity. And instead of showing solidarity with them, the government sent the riot squad, fully armed riot squad police in to arrest them. And I was trying to defend the students. And I tried to stop the police. They still went in and, arrested and moved on the students, and they arrested myself. They had no basis to arrest me, and we had those charges dismissed. But, I mean, it goes to show just how much work we have to do on the politics here. Instead of, listening to the kids, they literally sent the riot squad in to arrest them.
That's very wrong. That's really wrong.
Terrible. It was terrible.
That shows Anyway, thanks for that. And my next question, I listened to your speech a few weeks ago in a community gathering, and you were one of the speakers. And you always talk about oppression in Kashmir. And Kashmir is one of the most beautiful places in the world. Unfortunately, it's called the paradise on earth. Unfortunately, it's located between three nuclear power, India, China, and Pakistan. Today, Kashmir makes the largest militarized zone on planet Earth, with more than 900,000 Indian forces roaming freely with impunity. The poor people have been subjected to all kinds of oppression, and you always talk about it. And in 2019, October, you had a meeting in the parliament and the community, and you delivered a speech. In that speech, you said, Greens demand for free Kashmir. We all, Kashmir is one free decision. What steps have you taken to achieve the objectives and raise further international awareness to this cause?
Well, I think the first thing we've done is very clearly bring that call for the people of Kashmir to determine their future and to an end to this, the military occupation. Many people in Australia don't understand that is the most militarized part of the world. The single largest military occupation force on the planet is the Indian Army and its occupation of Kashmir and Jammu. As you point out, more than 900,000 troops. And in addition to that, tens and tens of thousands of Indian federal police have been located there more recently. We see political leaders being arrested. We see disappearances, arbitrary arrest, lethal force being used on protests. There was an internet blockade. One of the key things we've been trying to do is to educate the Australian community about this. So we bring those motions to the floor of Parliament, the New South Wales Parliament where I am. My colleague, Senator Janet Bryce, takes them to the federal Parliament. We demand that there be a debate in our Parliament about the core rights of the people of Kashmir to basically determine their own future. That's what the United Nations has repeatedly said. And I think what you can see in the last 2 years is, and I don't pretend it's just the work of Greens MPs, we've seen the community step up and demand to be heard. We've seen some more academics step up and demand to be heard. And we are now seeing commentary in major Australian newspapers like the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. We're now seeing commentary acknowledging the human rights abuses in Kashmir. And I think it's a critically important time for us because Australia is looking to strengthen its security relationship with India. And there's geopolitical reasons for that. It's a counterbalance to China. But in doing that, Australia is refusing to raise with the Indian government, an increasingly right-wing, intolerant BJP administration in India, refusing to raise these core human rights issues. And I think that's why it's incredibly important that we have MPs within the parliament, state and federal, putting those human rights issues on the agenda, demanding the Australian government be an advocate for what the UN has said we need in Kashmir, which is a free, independent decision of the people of Kashmir about their future. So I think we're part of a growing movement in Australia, part of a growing global movement to speak the truth about what's happening in Kashmir.
Yeah. And lately there was lots of encounter killing, and last week I think the human rights activist Kuram Parvez was arrested. Even United Nations said he should be free. So thank you for that concern and making awareness to the public and particularly Australian community and the parliamentarian, and I think people of Kashmir will appreciate that.
Well, I mean, you hope so. You hope that solidarity, and we've seen the Indian government force Amnesty International out of the country because they were bearing witness to what was happening in Kashmir. So, plenty more work to be done in this space. But I would hope that international solidarity continues to be a core part of our work.
Thanks. Thanks for that. My next question and last question will be, India has the second largest Muslim population in the world after Indonesia, and Muslims are the largest minority in India. According to recent news from India, the crime against the Indian Muslims are increased. And India and Australia have a very good bilateral relationship and business relationship. What role can Australia play to influence the Indian government to ensure the safety of the minorities?
Well, I think it has to be core to Australian foreign policy to not only be looking for military ties, but to be looking for cultural ties, to be working with other nations who share our values. Now, hopefully their values of democracy, respect for the individual, prohibition on discrimination against people, whether it's for their race or their religion, their political views. And what I think many human rights advocates have been very anxious about is over the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen a deepening military connection and a deepening diplomatic connection and a deepening trade connection with India. But what we haven't seen is that honesty about human rights. Now, it's my view that there is our long-term interest for the people of Australia, the people of India, to have long-term deep friendship. But a friendship is based upon honesty, and a good friend speaks the truth to their friend if they're failing to live up to core values. And we're not seeing that. We are not seeing the Australian government, when they have bilateral arrangements with India, when they meet with the BJP leadership in particular, we're not seeing that honesty about what I think any fair observer would say is increasing sectarian violence, increasing Islamophobia, and some of that, a significant part of that, being directed at a government level. A conscious part of the federal government policy, state government policy in India. And we've seen sectarian violence, we've seen killings, and we've also seen a greater intolerance in Indian politics. And that is not good for the long-term stability of India, and it's not good for a long-term stable relationship with Australia, because our relations need to be based not just on trade and military, but on those shared values.
Shared values and trust. And Muslim being lynched in the public just because they ate meat or beef, that's kind of things. And recently there is lots of riots. I don't say it's riots, organized crime against Muslims in Assam, killing and looting and burning Muslim properties. And right now it's in another state. There was election is Tripura. The same thing happening. And as you said, Australia has to have a relationship on trust and honesty.
And it's a mixture of indifference, like the authorities refusing to step up and stop violence when it's happening against the Muslim minority. But we're also seeing very disturbing examples where federal and state officials are actually encouraging the violence, and particularly online. There are some quite hateful communications happening online against the Muslim minority in India, and we don't see that being called out or stopped by the Indian government, and we're not seeing that honest feedback from Australia either. I mean, I think for many Australians, one of the things that happened very recently that was, although it's at the lower end of the scale, was still very jarring to Australians, was we saw some people in Kashmir being arrested and charged because they celebrated the Pakistani cricket win. You know, that goes to show just how extreme some of this sectarian politics has become in India.
That's very, 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 it's very disgusting, like, here you celebrate anybody's winning, a lot of people can suffer.
If you got arrested in Australia for not backing Australian sporting teams, half of the New Zealand diaspora would be, arrested for supporting the All Blacks. We'd have the Indian diaspora arrested for supporting the Indian cricket team, the Pakistani diaspora, the English cricket team. Yeah. I mean, I think that goes to show how dangerous it is.
Yes.
What we saw in India shows how dangerous it is when that sectarian politics becomes entrenched. And whilst it might be, as I said, at the lower end of the violence and the sectarianism, it illustrates for the Australian audience the challenges.
Yeah, thank you very much, and it's very exciting, and I know that it's a very busy time for you because of the local election is on next month, and once again, Hanif Bismi Show and 5 News Australia is very thankful to you coming all the way to our studio and meeting and spending the time, especially this election time, and we wish you and your Greens all the best success in the future, particularly in the coming local election, December next month.
Yeah.
And all the best. And thank you very much once again.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure to be here.